Back in so many ways, our lives are shaped by the lives of our parents. For our next guest, whose parents were survivors of the Holocaust, this meant processing the resilience and loss of what her family had been through.
In her new book, Kiss the Red Stairs, The Holocaust Once Removed, she tells her family's story and considers what it means to be a child of survivors. We're happy to welcome author and journalist Marsha Lederman to the show. Hi, Marsha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Marsha, thanks for being here. Let's dive in. Among other things, this book is really a story about your parents. Your father was the only person to survive the Holocaust from his immediate family, and your mother was imprisoned in Auschwitz. You have said that this was a really challenging book to write, but you also felt a responsibility to put it out there. Talk about why that is.
Yeah, I've always thought of my parents' lives as these miracles. And so because of that, I've thought of my own life as a miracle. And because of that, I grapple with excuse me, the fact that terrible things led to my existence. People sometimes ask me, how long did it take to write this book? And I joke that it took me 55 years because, like you say, my whole life has been shaped by this. And I've been observing, taking notes. And I feel like if my life is a miracle, then I have a responsibility to do something with that.
Now, you were aware of the Holocaust from a young age, and in some cases, your education was like brutally honest, because you were given details and information that weren't suited to kids, but it was typical for the time. So what kind of impact did that have on you?
Yeah, the way I learned the first time was when I asked my mother really a simple, innocent question. Why don't I have grandparents? My friends have them. And her answer, like, she was blindsided. I guess she wasn't expecting this, but her answer was really frank and involved, some terrible details. And then when I was 7, I was shown a film at Hebrew school that was, yes, that's me at 7, pre-orthodontics. And I was shown this horrible film and without any sort of preparation or trigger warning. And now I'm a mother. I have a 13-year-old, and I've been so worried about how do I present this story to him without traumatizing him. Because when I was a kid, one of the sort of things that went around in my head was, if they did this to Jewish people and I'm Jewish, are they going to do this to me?
You refer to yourself as 2G, or second generation, and of course you write about the intergenerational trauma passed down from your parents to you. Your therapist was actually the first person to point out this connection, and you realize that you have experienced the world like a survivor. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, one of my many therapists, I'll add. So there are certain traits that researchers have found are common to children of survivors. And in talking with other 2Gs, as we say, I get the same story from them. We're always suspicious. We're a little bit pessimistic. It's hard to trust certain things. You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Things don't work out well for us. I was at a conference with other children of survivors before the pandemic, and a woman talked about always taking the aisle seat in a theater because you never know what's going to happen. And we were all nodding our heads like, yeah, we all do that. And one other thing that's very common is having nightmares. So the Nazis or some kind of scary person, they're coming after me or my parents, or, like, heaven forbid, my son.
And further to that, I think we often think that intergenerational trauma is like nurture, but it's also how our parents raise us, for sure. But you say that there are new studies that suggest that trauma can be passed down through DNA, which that's nature. So can you unpack that a little bit and what significance this has for you personally?
Okay, I'm going to try, Lainey. I'm not very good with science, but when I started writing this book and researching it, there were all these studies coming out talking about this very thing that you're mentioning, epigenetics, how when someone experiences trauma, they can pass it on to their children, not not exactly through their DNA. Their DNA doesn't change, but there's an alteration to how their genes operate. And there are these chemical markers that can be passed on to their offspring. So I may have literally inherited my parents' trauma in some way on a cellular level. And what was weird about this is I found that information liberating because it meant I didn't have to blame my parents. This was something that happened in their bodies, and that's how I got it.
Wow, I mean,
That makes total sense
it
to
does.
me.
Me too.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. Let's talk about this. Recent reports have suggested that as many as 1/3 of Canadian and American students in grades 6 to 12 believe that the Holocaust was either fabricated or not reported accurately. That report also found that 40% of students were using, of course, social media to learn about the Holocaust rather than learning about it in the classroom. So what do you want to see change when it comes to education?
Oh my gosh, when you say that, I just feel sick. Like
Yep.
that's so horrible. And I think about, we were just talking a moment ago about this responsibility I feel. This is why I feel the responsibility. It's still happening. People are still denying the Holocaust or dismissing it or saying it wasn't so bad or just get over it already. But to me, this isn't ancient history. This happened to my mother and my father. This happened to my parents. So it's so distressing when I hear statistics like that. Or even at my son's high school here in Vancouver, there are swastikas being drawn on the washroom stalls. There were swastikas painted or written on an eraser. And I don't blame the kids. I think the kids don't really understand what those symbols mean, what they can lead to. So it's really important to assign, age appropriate research projects, books. There are Holocaust centers across the country that will organize survivors to come into schools and speak to the kids. And those conversations can be life-changing. And I highly recommend educators do that.
Well, and perhaps in part in response to some of these disturbing stories that we're hearing, there's currently a bill making its way through Parliament that would make Holocaust denial a crime in Canada. So if we're thinking about the state of anti-Semitism in this country, would you consider this a sign of progress or like a bummer, like a sign of regression that we even need to put this into law?
Both.
Yeah.
It's a huge bummer. And it is a sign that things are not going well. Hate crimes and anti-Semitic hate crimes are on the rise in an astonishing way. That said, I'm not so sure about this bill. I have mixed feelings about it. Holocaust denial is criminal, but making it a crime to even downplay it, which I understand this law would do, I mean, good luck with that. It's downplayed all the time. It's going to be messy. I worry that it could be like a platform to Holocaust deniers under the guise of free speech to, be righteous in their in their pronouncements. And I am very concerned about the level of Holocaust denial and even more dismissal on social media. But I don't know that Canadian legislation is going to be able to change that. I don't know.
Now, you say you're haunted by the fact that, you didn't ask your parents enough questions about their lives when they were alive. And I think a lot of people might be familiar with that regret. So what would you say to people who still have their parents with them? And, what do you wish someone might have told you?
Yeah, that is a huge theme of my book, and I know it's something that you can relate to. I would say if your parents are still around or your grandparents or aunts, uncles, this weekend, make a plan, spend the day together, bring questions, make coffee, graduate to wine, ask them questions about their lives, and get not just the stories, but get them in sequence, get them in order, the chronology, clarify the details. I never did that. I had to go to libraries in the United States to find out information about my own parents. So if you can do it, Father's Day's coming up. Do it then. There, I've made your Father's Day plans for you.
Listen, we've talked a lot about the inheritance of trauma, but with that trauma comes resilience. So when you reflect on your parents and your upbringing, what do you take away now?
Yeah, that is one of the things that I have to say I walked away feeling really good about. I mean, not that I've walked away from this, but when I finished the book and finally sent it in, I felt like, my parents have been through hell on earth, and yet they managed to come together, build a new life, start a family, move to Canada, a country where they didn't even speak the language, and then just like do normal things like that picture. My mother and I were out celebrating my birthday. Um, and that might sound like nothing to us, but to me, to have that strength after what they'd been through, that is the story of heroes. And I'd always thought of them as victims, but they were heroes and victims, and they were heroes because of their resilience. And I like to think that maybe I inherited some of that strength and resilience. I sure hope so.
We would agree, Marsha. I know it took you 55 years to write, but we're so grateful that you did it. You are a miracle. Thanks so much for joining us today for this conversation. The book is called Kiss the Red Stairs. You can find it everywhere now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.